Hello and welcome to Writing Today. In this episode, I'm going to be talking about how to write a thriller. I'm talking about it recently because I have released a thriller called Cryptic Pines. It's a part of my Charlie Davis thriller series. If you want to check that book out, it is available on Amazon. There's also a link to my store in the description below. So after writing hundreds of thriller stories, it was about time that I finally wrote a thriller novel. And I'm quite happy with it and currently working on the second in my Charlie Davis thriller series. Since this is something that has taken up a lot of my writing time recently, I thought about discussing the many elements that you need to really hit when it comes to writing a thriller story. So let's get straight into it with the very first aspect, which is understanding thrillers. When it comes to understanding thrillers, you need to understand who your audience is and what they are looking for. This can be said of many other genres, of course, but thrillers tend to have many subgenres. You can have psychological thrillers, crime thrillers, espionage thrillers. You don't need to have a serial killer or supernatural monster to create tension. So while my thriller stories typically focus on more supernatural threats, there are many thrillers out there today which are doing very well, which focus on more realistic threats. Crime thrillers are one of the most read subgenres today. And that's why I say it's important to understand who your target audience is and what they want. And once you understand which subgenre is the best one that you're going to fit into, you better understand then what elements you need to include to make sure that your story is a hit in that subgenre. The second point is about compelling characters. Now, compelling characters are welcome in every genre, but typically, a thriller requires realistic characters to keep the immersion of suspense alive. A feeling of fear and tension is difficult to maintain, and most commonly it is broken by unrealistic characters. How often do you watch a horror movie or series and you see a character do something that you just can't believe they actually would do? It then comes off as ridiculous, it breaks the immersion, and the suspense and fear is lessened or lost. The way that many writers do this in the thriller genre is they make the character have a particular issue that humanizes them, that weakens them. This isn't a character who is straight out of an action novel, where they have so many skills to their advantage and very few flaws. Instead, this is a very down-to-earth character who's struggling with some mundane issues in their life as well as a complex issue which may be the center of the story. The third point is talking about the different thriller plot devices, and there are so many to talk about. For example, foreshadowing, alluding to something that is going to happen in the story subtly. Sometimes it is often a bit too heavy-handed, and this can spoil the story, but when it's done correctly, foreshadowing is a great way to add depth to a story. You can also get those silly moments where a character says, "Can it get any worse?" really tempting fate, or in this case, you as the author. Plot twists and red herrings are also commonplace, and while this is typical in crime thrillers and espionage thrillers because we tend to have betrayals, plot twists of these characters turning against the main character, or mystery thrillers where there is a puzzle to be solved and you want to make sure the reader doesn't solve it ahead of time. One of my personal favorite plot devices is the unreliable narrator, but that's because I do enjoy stories from H.P. Lovecraft, which typically have characters who are under the influence of some drug or alcohol or simply gone mad. All these elements can add to your story, but they can also take away from it if they are out of balance. So you also need to make sure you don't overuse them or lean too heavy on them. You don't want so many red herrings that your story becomes a confusing mess, or as I said earlier, you don't want to foreshadow something so bluntly that it spoils the story. And speaking of balance, that brings us to point 4, which is pacing. Pacing is one of the most important aspects of a thriller story. Again, pacing is important in every genre. But a thriller novel depends on decent pacing to help deliver truly impactful scenes. Too much action or too many tense scenes and they lose their impact. The moments before the reveal are often the scariest as well, so it's good to let the suspense build for as long as possible, but not so much that the reveal is a disappointment. It is a balancing act. There is no better way to describe it. So when you are writing a tense scene and you want to get the most out of it, you have to take pacing into account. But if you want to draw things out, you want to have close calls and suspense, you need to make use of those plot devices first of all, in this case, but pacing specifically. For example, you want your character to perhaps try hiding, you want them to try calling for help, you want to give them many tasks to try and escape the situation they're in, or have someone come rescue them, or to combat the threat. So take note of your pacing as a thriller author. It's going to be a little bit different from other stories, which tend to focus on high energy scenes. You need to focus on the low energy building of suspense moments before your high energy scenes. Now, moving on to the final point, and that is using the familiar fears. A classic saying when it comes to writing anything scary is to write about what scares you the most. When many hear this, they try to focus on some personal, specific, scary moment, which is great, but to appeal to a greater audience, it's better to focus on fears you have that you know other people will have as well. And some are reasonable fears, like that home intruder scenario, or perhaps swimming in an ominous dark lake at night and something shifts the water next to you. If you have a phobia of squirrels wearing hats, then you might not appeal to so many readers. But when you focus on these more commonplace and realistic fears, the fears of the dark, the unknown, being confronted with a realistic down-to-earth threat without anything to protect oneself or defend oneself, then it does become a lot more universal. And once more, this does call back to realistic and relatable characters. It pays to work with realistic, relatable horror. All of these elements, if properly done, will perfectly synergize. And if you have a plot that connects them all, then you have a complete novel ready to go. And even when I'm writing something that is supernatural based with a ghost or monster or something like that, I still try to focus on many of the familiar fears to help ground it. Because I know if I lean too heavy on supernatural aspects, I can lose the believability of the story. Fear is one of those things that needs to be grounded in reality as much as possible without it feeling mundane and simplified. So if I include too many fantastic things, then I lose that believability and I lose a lot of the fear. Which is another reason why these more down-to-earth thrillers do so well, your crime thrillers or espionage thrillers. Because the tension that is described in those stories is a lot more relatable as well as believable. Of course, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this as well. If you're an experienced thriller writer or thriller reader, what are your thoughts on the genre, and what advice would you give to authors who are looking to write a story in this genre? Please let me know in the comments below. If you're interested in checking out any of my writing, there's a link to my bookstore in the description below, where you can check out my books and buy them directly from my store or on Amazon, as well as many other major book platforms. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next one. With that, good day, good night, and happy writing.